Welcome to Author Chats, powered by EdCircuit and presented by John Catt Educational. John Catt Educational is proud to feature a roster of authors that includes education experts and practitioners in the UK and North America. In this interview series, published on EdCircuit, many of our authors will have the opportunity to discuss their latest publications and give you insights into the inspiration and strategies behind their books.
Hello, and welcome to EdCircuit Author Chats, presented by John Catt Educational. Today's guest is author, educator, and researcher Daniel Book. Daniel, welcome to Author Chats.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Daniel is a senior visiting fellow at the Fordham Institute and author. Daniel's work has appeared in various publications, including National Review, The Wall Street Journal, Real Clear Education, and the New York Post. But most importantly, Daniel is a teacher. As an author, Daniel's work deconstructs preconceived ideas and structures of education using philosophy, contemporary educational studies, cognitive science, and his own classroom experience. Daniel's recent book, What is Wrong with Our Schools, was published by John Catt Educational in 2022. Daniel, what led you to study dysfunction in the American school system?
I live it every single day. I see in my classroom the way, not even in my classroom, because I've tried to, push against it, but I've seen in professional development, theories of education that simply don't work when put into practice. I've talked with teachers who are frustrated by the new fads that seemingly come out every single day. Every week there's something new. I saw it all the time in my school of education, teacher prep, these ideas that if we just leave students to be, if we put students in the classroom and just have them discover their way into long division or discover their way into, the concepts of science, that's the best way to do it. And it simply doesn't work. So I've seen the ideas that are pushed onto teachers. I've tried them myself. I saw that they're ineffective. I saw that they lead to chaos in the classroom. I saw that they lead to kids simply not learning. And I sought out alternatives. And there's a lot out there. There's a whole tradition of, old school education going back to Aristotle even. And I started reading into it, and I saw that there's a lot of cognitive science and, like you said, modern educational studies that kind of prove these old methods work pretty darn well.
Well, was there a particular audience that you had in mind when exploring this subject? Was it teachers, administrators, researchers?
It began with teachers. The most common question I get asked on social media is, who should I read? I went to teacher prep and I was given John Dewey, I was given Paulo Freire. I was told that progressive educational models like project-based learning are the gold standard. I don't know what else is out there. So I kind of wrote this book hoping to summarize what the alternative is, both explaining the theory behind it, the studies that prove that it works, and then some practical application as well. So I started this for teachers, but with, the rising parent movement and everything else, and people really, all of the debates focusing on education in particular right now, it's kind of schools have become the center of the culture wars. This book, I think anyone interested in education policy is going to come away with a better understanding of what do we actually need to do to improve our schools. A lot of the popular policies just don't do much. Even things like classroom size or school funding or even school choice, which I'm a fan of, are not the panaceas that people think they are. For parents that are looking to advocate for their kids for effective instruction in the classroom, it's a book that's written that I think anyone who reads it, teacher, parent, policymaker, somebody just interested in education, is going to come away with something from it.
I think so at the end of the book, with that last chapter, you do reference a lot of materials that people can read. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, and I didn't want to just give like a suggested reading list, but I included a brief description so people can know, is this worth my time or not?
Mm-hmm. Okay, now there are several flawed ideas explored in this book. Can you share some glaringly flawed ideas about education that some parents, politicians, or even educators may still believe are accurate and effective?
Yeah, there's a handful I can think. I mean, more than a handful. I'm always wary of cliches in education and platitudes and very positive sounding phrases like critical thinking skills. This idea that we can train students in an abstract process like critical thinking. And this is one of the first trendy, popular, faddish concepts that I really kind of took apart and deconstructed. And it kind of led me in this direction of researching and writing about more traditional pedagogies, traditional approaches to the classroom. So critical thinking, um, it's kind of a nonsense concept. It's kind of a mirage in the distance. We can think, we're human. We can think critically pretty naturally. John Dewey gives this example of critical thinking, so to speak, of a man standing on the street. It's sunny out. He sees dark clouds in the distance. He feels a cold breeze. He doubts if the good weather is going to continue. He sees this new information, and then he comes to a new conclusion. It's going to rain pretty soon. That, to John Dewey's critical thinking. If that's all that critical thinking is, it's pretty basic. My dog thinks critically. When I let her outside, there might be a big scary noise. She runs to the stoop, takes in information, and sees, do I need to go inside or can I go back and chase the bunnies? Critical thinking is a pretty basic process. So how do we teach our students to think critically? We need to give them knowledge. We need to give them factual knowledge. If I want them to think critically about, modern politics, they need to have read the Constitution. They need to know a whole lot of our history. They need to know both sides of whatever debate we have in discussion. It's the factual knowledge that's going to allow them to think critically on any topic. Another example, discovery learning, project-based learning, these simply don't work. If you look into the research, one study or one review of the studies that's pro project-based learning admits that there's a paucity, there's a great lack of any evidence that this actually works. And there's this great academic article by John Sweller, Kirshner, and Clark called Why Minimal Guidance in Instruction Doesn't Work. And it reviews all of the evidence that shows these low guidance, right? The teacher isn't doing much. We're just leaving students to discover things on their own. There's no evidence that it works. In fact, it can work against student learning. They can mislearn things. They can learn false information. More often than not, individualized attention from a teacher means the 19 other kids in the classroom, the 29 other kids in the classroom are being neglected. So I have a whole chapter in the book dedicated to this, and it's my favorite chapter, going from project-based learning to creative thinking, critical thinking, lifelong learning, all of these buzzwords that just don't have research behind them, that sound really nice, but just there's nothing there. It's a house of cards.
That was two biggies. Anything? Okay, so where do we start in addressing the flaws in the system? Now, this is a multi-question, so I'm going to start with that. And then, so are there small steps that we can take every day?
Oh my gosh. Policy, individual choices from teachers, parental pressure, reading my book. Where do we begin? I think when push comes to shove, this needs to be something of an intellectual revolution. Progressive education wasn't always the norm in this country. It was kind of a happenstance in history that at the same time that teacher training became under the purview of universities, progressive education, John Dewey, Kilpatrick, the people that first popularized these concepts, they were popular at the time. So progressive education became associated with the experts, so to speak. It became associated with the university opinion. Before then, classical education was the norm. So I think we need something of a intellectual revolution. I think it begins with getting more traditional texts on university curricula and teacher prep programs. So sure, read John Dewey. Awesome. He's an influential thinker. I don't think we should get rid of him, but students should also encounter E.D. Hirsch. So mixing up the authors that prospective teachers encounter. I think it begins with more and more and more teachers starting to advocate for things like cognitive science, the science of reading. It begins with building up institutions like Teach Like a Champion, like Research Ed, who are doing the work of not just having these arguments in the abstract, but training teachers in traditional approaches to the classroom, in pedagogies that have real research backing behind them. It begins with parents educating themselves so they're not caught up in mere rhetoric and buzzwords and platitudes, but can actually advocate for effective instruction in their own children's classroom. It begins with policies like school choice, where schools that aren't getting results, that aren't educating kids, families can go elsewhere and go to the schools that are implementing effective instruction, that have robust curriculum where kids are learning and the test scores show it, and the energy in the classroom where kids just feel engaged, where they feel like they have purpose, where they feel like they're learning. Families can then go to those schools, and more effective approaches are going to win out in the long run.
So you sort of mentioned, like, do you think there should be some sweeping legislation, like at the local level or the state level, or?
Definitely not at the federal level. I think the federal level is simply too far away.
Right.
And the federal legislation just cannot account for individual kids. It cannot account for local conditions. I know in my own state, there are state standards for history curricula, for example. I cover it in a little more detail in my book, but it's just devoid of any content. There are all of these vague skills, like students can read and analyze primary texts, but there's no content on there. 1 year, it's left completely up to teacher choice. So kids might learn about the Civil War 3 years in a row, but they never learn about Auschwitz. And that's why we have, I think it's something like 2/5 or 3/5 of millennials don't know anything about the Holocaust, or very little about it. They don't know what Auschwitz is. They don't know about this incredibly important historical event that still influences contemporary politics and contemporary culture and contemporary debates. So when we don't have this content laid out on curriculum, then kids aren't going to get it. So I think revamping statewide curricular standards, like I said, I think school choice is going to incentivize families seeking out more effective instruction. They're going to go to the schools that are getting results. And so that's kind of going to pressure schools to adopt more effective strategies.
Is it simply a matter of changing the mindset of people, or is it more than that?
It's a mindset debate. There are policies that can push us in the right direction, but when push comes to shove, like I said, it's changing what teachers learn in the University of Education. It's getting rid of this idea that progressive approaches like project-based learning or discovery learning are the gold standard, are the expert opinion backed with research, when they're simply not. It begins with calling bad ideas, being forthright, and saying, this isn't another way to teach children. This is a very ineffective way to teach children. It is robbing them of an education. It is keeping them from learning. It is a terrible idea. So being a little more forthright in the debates that we have, it is an intellectual fight, and policy will help, but it can only do so much.
Interested in sharing your voice with the K-20 and EdTech community? EdCircuit empowers thought leaders across education to share their voices with our audience. Visit edcircuit.com to learn more.
In New York City now, they're kind of pushing back on that workshop, the Lucy Calkins workshop model, and insisting that schools, there should be phonics, can do other things. But so do you see that as a national trend, or is it just in certain places you think that might happen? Or
I think Lucy Calkins is getting the pushback that she needs and deserves, but I still see her curriculum. I mean, I saw a teacher walking around my school with the units of study just recently. Teachers are trying to figure out what do I do on Monday when kids come into my room? Teachers have families that they have to go home to. They're not a crazy person like myself who goes home and spends their time reading education research, and I wouldn't expect them to. They have better things to do with their life. So they are going to use what they're getting. They're going to trust the higher ups that when they say this is backed by evidence and research, that it is. And this is where, again, ideas need to be that are destructive, that are ineffective, need to be called out. They need to be said so in the Wall Street Journal, in the New York Times.
What is the number one piece of advice you would give to an educator attempting to make their school less dysfunctional?
Pick up The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them by E.D. Hirsch and give it a read. And then also buy my book. But E.D. Hirsch kind of is credited with starting this movement for knowledge-centered curricula, for direct instruction, for using cognitive science and modern research studies to interrogate, improve the benefits of traditional instruction. Also, just stand up and say something. For many years, I kind of sat quietly, rolled my eyes, shut my door, and did my own thing. And finally, in the past few years, when I see something that I think is being implemented that is idiotic, that is counterproductive, I raise my hand and I say so. I say, this is a bad idea. This is what it is going to do. And it's tense, but I have found, last time I did it, I got applause from teachers. I had other teachers come up to me and say, thank you for saying that. It feels like you're pushing against the mainstream. It feels like you're going to make yourself an enemy of everyone in the school building, but there are so many people that agree. And until people stand up and say, this is a bad idea, the bad ideas are going to continue to flourish. Mm-hmm. And when you speak up, you will see how many people agree with you, and you will feel more empowered and become a better advocate for children, for schools, for education in America.
Since the publication of the book, which I know was in 2022, do you have anything to add that you didn't get in the book?
I've thought about that because the political debates about education continue to evolve and change. And as of right now, I didn't really get into too much of that. And sometimes I think the book would have sold more or will sell more if I had leaned into the politics a little bit more. But I think in the long run, I'm glad that I didn't, because I want to keep it focused on effective instruction, because I want to keep it focused on theory and not having to rely on trendy political debates to draw attention. So as of right now, I don't think there's much that I changed, because I had been in the classroom for years before I wrote this book. And I'd done a lot of this reading before I wrote this book. And anything that's happened in my classroom since then, any research that I've read since then, just continues to confirm what I already said there.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your ideas with me and our listeners. And listeners, as you can imagine, there's so much more to this. So please check out Daniel's recent publication, What is Wrong with Our Schools? The Ideology Impoverishing Education in America and How We Can Do Better for Our Students, and find more information in the show notes.
On behalf of John Catt Educational, thank you for listening to this episode of Author Chats. To access other podcasts in this series, visit edcircuit.com for a complete lineup of engaging topics. EdCircuit empowers the voices of education with hundreds of trusted contributors, change makers, and industry-leading education innovators.